Welcome to Minnesota Housing. Thank you for taking the time to view this tutorial as it highlights changes made to the 2015 RFP. It specifically addresses updates associated with our underwriting guidelines. During this tutorial, I will touch on our amortizing loan products and which underwriting standards are used for each. Second, I will give an overview of 4 significant changes to the multifamily underwriting standards. And finally, the last few slides will cover the dual application process and specific tax-exempt bond items. Minnesota Housing offers amortizing mortgage loans for multifamily rental housing under both the HUD Multifamily Accelerated Processing MAP program, Section 221D and 223F, as well as the agency's own Low and Moderate Income Rental LMIR program. We provide financing for new construction, substantial rehabilitation, refinancing, and acquisition of multifamily rental housing through both the LMIR and the HUD MAP lending programs. These financing products are available both through the RFP as well as on a year-round pipeline basis. The 221D and 223F products will have low fixed interest rates, are fully amortizing loans with terms up to 40 years, 35 years for 223F, and are underwritten in accordance with HUD's MAP requirements. LMIR loans are also fixed-rate, fully amortizing loans with 30-year terms. LMIR loans are insured under HUD's risk-sharing program, where HUD agrees to insure a portion of the risk of loss on the loan. The loans are underwritten in compliance with the agency's underwriting standards. More information about these and other multifamily lending programs can be obtained on Minnesota Housing's website under Multifamily Available Financing. Now I would like to highlight 4 important changes that you will find in the multifamily underwriting standards. You can find the multifamily underwriting standards under the Quick Links bar on the left side of the screen from any multifamily web page. Minnesota Housing's deferred loan funding will be structured with cash flow note provisions requiring that 20% of eligible cash in excess of $50,000 be paid annually to subordinate lenders, which includes lenders of other deferred debt, including seller loans, on a prorated basis. Eligible cash means surplus cash available for partnership distribution, less any outstanding credit adjusters, limited partner asset management fees, operating reserve account replenishment, and deferred developer fees. Developments considered to be supportive housing generally shall be exempt from cash flow note provision requirements. Beginning with the 2015 RFP, an energy rebate analysis will be required for developments awarded tax credits or deferred funding. The estimated rebate amount will be included as a funding source on the development budget, and our tax credit and deferred loans will be sized based on this estimate. Please note that the agency funding and/or credit allocation will be subject to reduction based on the final rebate estimate. At the application phase, a preliminary rebate amount will be included as a source on the construction budget. An explanation of the energy rebate analysis will also be included. Then, prior to loan commitment, a final ERA prepared by a third-party entity with recommendations, calculations, energy models, and other technical data to support the recommendations will be required. If renewable energy standards are proposed, a cost-benefit analysis will also be required. The energy rebate will need to be bridged during construction. After repayment of the bridge loan, Minnesota Housing requires any excess rebate funds to be deposited into a reserve account. Alternatively, Minnesota Housing may also allow excess funds to be applied toward the payment of the deferred developer fee. It is important to note that the rebate is not basis eligible and must be deducted from basis for calculation of credits. The third change is the construction inspection fee. Up until now, this has been a fee charged only on our LMIR amortizing loans. Going forward, in an effort to more accurately reflect the time and cost of administering construction oversight, which the agency performs for all loans, this fee will now be charged for all agency loans, both amortizing and deferred, with the exceptions as noted on the slide for developments funded with either home loans or tax credits only, with no other agency funding, and for MAP loans, which have fees per the HUD MAP requirements. Because the fee is now being spread across more developments, the formula has been revised to the lower of 0.25% of the construction contract or 1.0% of all agency loans. The fourth important change I want to draw your attention to applies only to the agency's LMIR amortizing first mortgages. In the past, the agency required both a working capital escrow and a rent-up escrow, both of which were funded at 3% of the loan amount. Going forward, the agency is combining this into one operating deficit escrow. The amount and duration is modified and includes the following 4 components. 1. The escrow will be sized based on the greater of 3% of the loan amount or the projected operating deficits during the absorption period as determined by the agency's underwriting analysis. 2. The escrow may be accessed at the agency's sole discretion and can be used to cover operating deficits during rehabilitation of an existing development or during the stabilization period. The escrow will be released on the later of the following 2 scenarios: 1 year after permanent loan closing, or achievement of a 1:15:1 debt coverage ratio for 6 consecutive months. The DCR will be calculated based on the actual revenue less the greater of actual or underwritten effective gross expenses. 4. The escrow will be continued to be provided in the form of an irrevocable unconditional letter of credit or cash from the owner. The escrow will not be allowed to be included in the development budget. This is unchanged from previous years. Several years ago, Minnesota Housing introduced the concept of dual applications where one proposal could simultaneously be considered for financing under both a 9% competitive tax credit and as a 4% tax-exempt bond structure. The dual application process allows the developer to simultaneously submit 2 applications, which allows Minnesota Housing to consider the development under multiple scenarios and allows us to select the structure that represents the best fit both for the development and for the agency overall. This allows Minnesota Housing to fund more developments that would be possible if only one potential structure were available. This year we have continued and refined that opportunity. On the next several slides, I will explain the 3 dual application scenarios and under what criteria each is available. Later, I will briefly touch on the additional underwriting due diligence that needs to be part of your dual application request. The 3 dual application scenarios are: 1. Required dual application with 4% credits, 2. Optional dual application with 4% credits, 3. And optional dual applications with deferred-only funding. This structure does not utilize any tax credits. Under each of these scenarios, you will submit one application which utilizes a 9% competitive tax credit application. The dual application includes completion of the dual application certification letter, a second complete workbook with the second structure reflected, and if applicable, the appropriate bond application materials. It is expected that the second application will vary in regards to the inclusion of bond-related costs in the development budget. The first dual application scenario is the required 9% and 4% dual application. A development that meets the following criteria is required to submit a dual application. Number 1, applicants seeking 9% competitive credits with selection priority points for preservation, or number 2, applications that meet other specific funding criteria, such as the Housing Infrastructure Bond, HIB criteria, PARIF preservation criteria, or the Jobs and Housing Initiative criteria, and number 3, developments with at least 40 units and at least $2.5 million of expected tax credit equity under the 4% structure, and 4, the project will utilize at least $2 million in bond proceeds. Note, the $2 million in tax-exempt bond limit only applies if Minnesota Housing is proposed to be the issuer of the tax-exempt bonds, and it does not apply if Minnesota Housing awards Housing Infrastructure Bond deferred funding, because those bonds can be structured in such a way that they will count toward the 50% test to make the development eligible for the 4% tax credits. Please refer to the 2015 Multifamily Request for Proposal Guide for details of the funding criteria for HIB, PARIF, and Housing Jobs Initiative funding. Under option number 2, any development may submit a dual application with a 4% structure if the application either meets the size thresholds described previously or the application includes a true and valid letter of interest from a tax credit investor or syndicator proposing to buy the 4% credits. The letter must document that initial underwriting has taken place, include preliminary terms, and be signed by both the investor and the applicant. This is to ensure that a development with a relatively small amount of credits is indeed feasible and has been underwritten by the investor. The third option is for those developments that meet either the Housing Infrastructure Bond or the Housing and Jobs Initiative priorities, but have fewer than 40 units and less than $2.5 million in equity, or uses less than $2 million of tax-exempt bonds and is not feasible with 4% credits. Under this option, a development may submit a dual request for deferred funding only. I strongly urge any applicant interested in using 4% tax credits to refer not only to the Tax Credit Procedure Manual, but also to the Qualified Allocation Plan that will be in effect for the calendar year in which the tax-exempt bonds will be issued. For a 4% structure, there are a couple of bond-related items to look for in the workbook. These are things that should be specific for each proposal under the dual application process. While these aren't new items this year, I want to point them out to eliminate confusion and miscommunication. First of all, on the Instructions tab under Funding Request, indicate what type of funding and tax credits are being requested from Minnesota Housing. Below Minnesota Housing Request, alternatively indicate if you are requesting bonds and/or tax credits from a suballocator. On the Summary tab, under Housing Tax Credit Request, specify if the application is for 9% or 4% credits and if it is part of a dual application. The amount of credits will populate from the Determination of Credit tab. In the Development Cost tab, be sure to include the appropriate bond-related fees, including, if applicable, bond issuance, bond counsel, underwriter counsel, trustee, rating agency, and other bond fees as appropriate. If tax-exempt bonds are being requested from Minnesota Housing, refer to the Low and Moderate Income Rental Program Guide for the agency bond issuance fees. Note these fees do not apply to housing infrastructure bonds. A new form has been developed this year to help ensure the compliance and feasibility of the development as a 4% structure. This form is required for all bond applications, including dual applications. The bond test worksheet form will do a preliminary analysis of the bond test, which will be discussed in a moment, and to establish a preliminary estimate of the amount of tax-exempt bonds that will be needed. Bond tests are generally done as part of the agency's underwriting in conjunction with our bond counsel. But in order to reduce errors and unanticipated consequences, we have added the bond test worksheet to the application process. This will allow the developer to do a preliminary but thorough review to ensure bond structure is appropriate. There are 5 bond tax credit tests that must be met to be eligible for tax-exempt bonds and related 4% tax credits. Number 1, rent plus the utility allowance on 20% of the units must be less than fair market rent. Rents under project-based rental assistance are deemed to meet this requirement. 2, the ratio of rehabilitation costs to building acquisition costs, land excluded, is greater than 15%. 3, show a sufficient amount of bond eligible and good costs for the amount of bonds requested. Note, bonds cannot pay for reserves and can only cover non-capital costs up to 3% of the bond amount. 4, evidence that sufficient bond proceeds will be utilized to meet the 50% test. This is required to be eligible to receive 4% tax credits. 5, minimum income and rent set aside at 40% of the units at 60% AMI or 20% of the units at 50% AMI. Of the above 5 tests, all except number 4 must be met both on a project level as well as on a site level for scattered site projects. So what is a scattered site project? For bond finance developments, a scattered site project is one that is not comprised of contiguous pieces of real property separated only by a street. And finally, I want to thank you for all you do to provide affordable housing in Minnesota. For more information about the dual application process or our underwriting standards, please contact me at susan.thompson@state.mn.us or 651-296-9838 or visit our website. More information about these and other multifamily lending programs can be obtained on Minnesota Housing's website under Multifamily Available Financing.